Hello and welcome to the Gamelore Archives. Today I'm going to discuss a fairly old game now called Her Story, an interactive puzzle game written, developed and produced by Sam Barlow and released in 2015. Believe it or not, this script was attempted in 2015 and it corrupted. The script was rewritten in 2022 and I've re-recorded it 3 times and it keeps failing. I'm hoping with the revival of my channel I have better luck and it works better. The whole game is revolved around unravelling this mystery, however, so if you want to go and play the game, do it before watching this, as this spoils the entire plot. You play as someone looking through old police footage about a woman called Hannah. It becomes quickly apparent that someone called Simon is missing, and the whole game is to work out what Hannah and Simon's story is. There's no checklist in the game or end. You just finish when you think you know what the story is by using the footage. And today, we're not only going to reveal what happened to Simon, but the events leading up to his disappearance. The clips you watch are from 7 interviews, which took place between the 18th of June to the 3rd of July in 1994, and to truly understand Simon's disappearance, we really need to discuss Eve. Before Hannah was born, her parents prepared for her arrival. They hired a midwife who lived across the street from them to help them to deliver the baby at home. They had been expecting a single daughter, and instead they got twins. One was perfectly healthy, who they called Hannah. The other was born being strangled by Hannah's umbilical cord. The midwife, named Florence, was a kind-hearted woman, but broken. She'd always wanted to be a mother, but had lost her husband in the war, becoming a widow in her early 20s. Since then, Florence never felt she could remarry, and stayed alone. So she told Hannah's parents that the second twin had died, and snuck her into her own home, calling her Eve. Due to this kidnapping, Eve and Hannah grew up in very different environments. Hannah had a normal childhood with loving parents, friends, family. She went to school, had birthday parties. In contrast, Florence couldn't roam around with a new baby when she was never pregnant that was identical to her neighbours. So instead of moving house, she kept Eve locked away and homeschooled her. Eve loved reading fairy tales, feeling a kinship with the princesses as they were often locked in towers guarded by a witch. Eve started looking out of her window to watch the outside world and was fascinated by the girl that looked just like her living across the street. One day Hannah noticed, so they began communicating with each other through the window. When the twins were 8 years old, Florence fell down the stairs and died. Eve found Florence's diary, which explained to her that she was stolen. Eve might not have fully comprehended this at the age of 8, but understood the girl across the road was her twin, so Eve crossed and knocked on the door. This story would end now if the twins' parents had opened the door instead of Hannah, or even if she'd have let her parents know. But instead she hid Eve in the attic, which was used as her private playroom that nobody but Hannah ever went into. As they spoke, they came up with a plan. They'd take their day in turns. Whoever left the house got to go to school and would go by the name Hannah, while the other would remain hidden in the playroom for the day. If anybody mentioned the name Eve, if their parents heard them whispering to each other, for example, they'd claim it was an imaginary friend. They made a list of rules of what they should and shouldn't do in any situation and wrote a massively detailed diary, so both knew the details of the days that they've missed. If one ended up getting hurt, the other would get hurt to match.
If one of us got hurt, the other one would have to be hurt too. A grazed knee, a bruise. When I lost my tooth first, we had to pull out Hannah's to match. Once, I slept with a boy who was seeing another girl. The girlfriend came up to Hannah the next day and punched her in the face, gave her a huge black eye. That night, she had to do the same to me.
This plan worked great while they were young, with the person who was better at any given topic taking a quiz.
We were so in sync that we'd use each other to cheat. If one of us had a hangover, the other one would go to school. Whoever was best at a subject would sit the exam. There were lots of differences between us. Some things one is better than the other at. Differences? She's a better driver than me. She passed the test for us.
However, they were different people. Hannah was shy and reserved, while Eve was a lot more confident. As they grew older, Hannah started to struggle attracting boys, so Eve would flirt and go on the first date, and they would alternate who to date from then on. That is until Simon. Simon worked with the twins, and Hannah had a massive crush on him. Eve initiated the date, but both sisters went.
After that, we took it in turns, though I was always the one who seduced the boys. Until Simon. Hannah was so smitten with Simon. She started getting jealous, didn't want to share. Even the first date, we went to see Tom Cruise at the Old Odeon. We both went, kept changing places in the toilet. We only had one best dress, so we had to keep swapping clothes.
However, Hannah then broke the rules. She didn't want to share Simon, so invited him on a second date, and slept with him, leading to her pregnancy. An obvious spanner, unless Eve also got pregnant. So that's what she got out to do. She bought a blonde wig, so she could sneak out unrecognised and begin to sleep with a lot of people just to get pregnant. She didn't have a proper home to bring them back to, so resorted to picking up drunks and sleeping with them in the back of cars or alleyways. This continued for a while until she got an STD and grew sick, which led to her getting thinner as Hannah got bigger. During this time, Hannah and Simon got married, moved in with his parents, leaving Eve trapped in the attic. Hannah had the idea to tell Simon all about Eve, so she can live with them once they got their own house. But before she can act, Hannah lost her baby, leaving her infertile. This tragedy is shortly followed by the death of her parents.
When my parents died in the summer, it was a hot summer, a heat wave. So when they discovered the bodies, it was just awful. Because of the circumstances, them dying together like that, they brought in a lot of police. The forensic entomologist. I had to look that up. It was because of the heat. It's just awful. They said it was food poisoning.
These losses devastate Hannah, who consider this period the worst time of her life. However, with her parents dead, Hannah and Simon inherit the house. Simon redecorates it, but Hannah bans him from changing or even entering the attic, which allowed Eve to continue to live there, which she did for around half a year. Eve wasn't happy with this new situation, and Hannah refused to let Eve pretend to be her or talk to Simon, turning her into a prisoner for the second time of her life. So Eve moved into a small bedsit, singing at a local bar to pay her rent. She got a tattoo to mark the occasion. One evening, Simon happened to drink in this bar and was mesmerised by Eve's likeness to his wife. After her set, he bought her a drink and the pair got talking. Eve loved that she could finally interact with Simon after all this time, but noticed that Simon wasn't wearing his wedding ring and never mentioned Hannah. After this, he began visiting the bar more, and while everything was innocent at first and Eve resisted Simon's dinner invitations, eventually they shared their first kiss. Eve felt guilty at first, but then genuinely believed this was how things were supposed to be, sharing the man just like they had when they were younger. Eventually, kissing became more, and Eve fell pregnant, which was unexpected as Eve had always just presumed she was infertile after trying so hard before. On their next birthday, she saw Hannah and told her the great news. Hannah was supportive and wanted to help, so went home and admitted to Simon she had a secret sister who had become pregnant and wanted her to move in. She read his face like a book, because as soon as she told him the news of Eve's baby, she knew Simon was the father. She kicked him out of the house and called Eve, and when Eve answered the phone, she was obviously upset, but wouldn't tell her why, so she drove straight over. Possibly a bad move, as a huge fight ensued. Eve left and drove to Glasgow, accidentally hitting a taxi. She was okay, however, when the driver realised she was pregnant, forced her to go to hospital to make sure the baby was okay. When she was released, she spent the rest of the night sleeping in the car. When she woke up, she tried to call Hannah and apologise, but realised that her relationship with her sister was more important. However, Hannah wouldn't answer the phone, so she began to drive back to her. I'm certain this script is cursed. I have taken a pause, my baby's cried, my toddler's needed me. I'm fairly certain you can hear the cat purring in the background now, but if I don't do this, it'll never get done. While Eve was driving around Glasgow, Hannah puts on her sister's wig and clothes on and calls Simon, pretending to be her. Simon arrives at the house and professes his love for Eve, saying he wanted to leave his wife and be with her, presenting her with an identical mirror that he'd given his wife for her birthday. Hannah flies into a rage, ripping the wig off and smashing the mirror. Simon hits her and she retaliates by slashing his throat by a piece of the smashed glass. Eve walks into the house to see Hannah standing over Simon's corpse. The sisters agree that after everything, it was Eve babies that mattered most and needed to be protected. So they cleaned the house and hid the body in the cellar. As nobody knew about Eve's existence, they knew they could use Eve's visit to the hospital as an alibi, as she would appear on CCTV. They then called the police to report Simon missing, which leads to the interview you're watching. Halfway through the interviews, Hannah calls the police, saying she has found Simon's body hidden in a plastic bag in her house. The twins' answers were scripted to make their story consistent, and the officers dealing with this seemed to notice, and so wire Eve up to the lie detector test, and she passed every question except one: her name. Eve reveals the whole story, and while it's hinted that Hannah flees the country and you play as Eve's child years later, looking after the death of her father that she's never going to meet. This of course means that Eve is innocent, but even that might not be strictly true. Two throwaway lines don't quite sit with me. Hannah's father researches mushrooms for a living, yet her parents died by eating a poisonous mushroom.
There was something in the food they ate. My dad liked to pick mushrooms, grow them too. They said it was the mushrooms. It was hard to believe. Death caps. They have a skirt around the cap. My dad taught me that. But the police had no reason to think it was suspicious. They lived alone and no one had any reason to hurt them.
By eating a poisonous mushroom. Which doesn't make sense, and Hannah doesn't have a reason to. So maybe it was Eve? What do you guys think? I'd love for you to leave a comment, let me know, and like the video, and maybe subscribe. And hey, there's even a Patreon. Thanks very much.